Moving on to our next guest speaker, Lubomila Jordanova is the founder and CEO of Plan A Earth, a Berlin-based startup offering an end-to-end platform that enables companies to measure, monitor, and reduce their environmental footprint. She is also the co-founder for the Green Tech Alliance, was recently announced as Marshall Fund Fellow for 2021, and was named one of the top 100 women in Germany 2020. Lubomila will be presenting on how technology supports the shift to a sustainable economy. Thank you for joining me today, Lubomila.
Hi, Greta. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks very much. And you can take the floor now with your presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. It's really a great pleasure to be here. Please let me know. I believe now we're live and you should be able to see my screen. I'm going to talk to you today a bit more about how can we enable a more sustainable future by using technology. A few years back, I was sitting in front of the challenge of trying to put together the vision and kind of concept of climate change in my mind. At that point, I was working in financial technology after having been active in investment banking, and was not necessarily focusing throughout my education or on a career level on what actually our planet was experiencing due to human impact. But after, I would say, destiny kind of infused journey to a beach in Morocco, where I ended up cleaning beaches instead of surfing, I started asking myself the question of, is there actually impact on our planet that is influenced by humans? And what can we do about it? What was the actual event that drove me to be where I am today was this. And that was essentially the first day of a trip where I was supposed to be surfing. Wasn't possible because I was very new to the topic, but also because the beaches on which I was supposed to be prepping for my surfing were covered in this. This is what you see here is what I collected within an hour, and was essentially evidence of human existence. There was different types of clothes, burnt plastic, a lot of construction site material, and other different elements. I ended up a bit shocked after 1 week of seeing this, and what I ended up doing, which is what I do when I'm not familiar with a topic, was that I decided to educate myself. I spent quite some time, close to a year, first of all, reading a lot of books, watching a lot of videos, subscribed to some pop culture magazines that were giving the scientific perspective on things. And the bottom line was that there was a clear correlation between humans and the health of our planet. The thing that I did after learning about this issue was also to understand what were the climate change issues as per confirmed data from institutions like World Bank, the UN. What were the biggest environmental impacts that we had, and how were they funded? Sadly, this experiment that resulted in a huge data model was quite sad in the sense that there was no positive correlation between the issues. The next experiment that I did was to interview more than 300 people. These people were predominantly people based in London and working in consulting, investment banking, quite far away from the topic of climate change. And that was also a devastating experiment because it led me to understand that people were not necessarily familiar with climate change and they didn't feel any responsibility towards the end impacts of it. 3 key learnings came out of this experience. First of all, it was that businesses were the key to addressing climate change. That was quite evident based on the data. More than 70% of emissions on this planet were created by businesses due to their different production, also the way they were using products and they were engaging their customers to use products. The second learning was that climate change science had to be the core of where we found solutions and how we developed them. But that was not necessarily what we were doing at that particular point. So it had to be somehow reinstalled in our minds and in the way we were practicing the implementation of sustainability. And then the final element was related to the necessity of a collaborative model. Climate change is too big of and too complex of a set of issues for one person or one institution or one stakeholder to be able to address this. Hence, we need to be all working together. Businesses cannot solve this by themselves if they don't engage their customers, their suppliers, also that engage with the scientific community and with the NGOs that are driving the impact on the ground itself. This 5-year journey ended up delivering a few different sets of products, but the one that is most prominent is our software. Our software enables corporates and fast-scaling businesses to monitor their emissions and learn how to reduce them. We automate the data collection process, and then thanks to our scientific team, have been able to develop different reduction plans for different industries based on their data, essentially, and then allow our clients to finally be regulatory compliant and to be able to report to all these new standards that popped up over the last few months even. The product is divided in 4, and it covers the calculation, the monitoring, the reduction, as well as the reporting. All of this is quite of a complex piece of tooling. It works across different industries and covers the whole granularity of Scope 3, which is essentially all the suppliers, the investments, the waste management, and even the water consumption of a company. We also cover ESG and actually have been able to support a lot of financial institutions specifically on this topic. The reduction element is quite important because this is ingrained in the thesis of the company and the value system that we have for the company, where we use the scientific capability that we have in-house to translate it into these different pathways. Today, my job here is to tell you a bit more about what is the role or responsibility that we have as a tech industry and how technology can enable us to do that. I start with juxtaposition of role versus responsibility. If you look at what a role is, it's actually something that is labeled, it's something that is quite well defined. But if you look at responsibility, it's something that you can decide to expand yourself into, depending on how you feel with regards to a certain topic. And a chief executive officer could be also the one that is dealing with maybe implementing long-term and short-term strategy, but could be also the one that is pioneering the sustainability agenda of a company. So if you look at the role of technology, we first need to start at the optimization of processes. Technology historically has been developed with the vision of optimizing for efficiency, hence for more revenue or more kind of impact on a monetary level. That is great if we're looking to optimize in terms of the time that it takes for people to do something. But if you're skipping the element of the environmental bill, you most likely are not accounting for what really you should be concerned of. And if you start optimizing for sustainability, you actually end up being quite well prepared for an unstable and maybe unfamiliar future. The second role that we have as an industry is related to resource management. If you look at how we manage our resources today, there's again a lot of focus on optimization, making investments where it's least costly, and making this cycle not necessarily a cycle, but more a linear process. This is not efficient, and this allows for a lot of waste and a lot of products that could be actually used to be optimized and introduced again into this cycle that should be the way our manufacturing, our production looks like. It is also related to engagement. These are just 2 examples that I've picked at random related to how you can engage your customers with regards to the topic of sustainability. If we're looking to engage someone in the e-commerce space or someone that is in the B2C sector, you can start by first allowing for your consumers to really pick what really matters to them. Out of the companies that we work with in the B2C space, more than half of them are actually coming to us because they feel pressure from their customers. And if it's not deeply embedded into your business model, like a company like Vestair that is around on the right-hand side, you can actually transform yourself and along the way encourage your clients to look into certain elements that matter to their decision-making and optimize for sustainability. Another element that is quite important in terms of the role that we have as an industry is related to equality. There's something called the skill premium that is particularly visible in the tech industry, and this is essentially this idea that there's no good matching of supply and demand of the skills that we're looking for. There's constant shortage of developers, there's constant shortage of product people, there's constant shortage of marketing people. And what this means is essentially that we are the ones as an industry that are introducing further gaps in terms of inequality on a societal level. So with this in mind, in order to remove yourself from this negative equation, you should be looking into how to remove this bias and reskill or re-educate or further enhance the skills that your team members have or the ones that are upcoming to make sure that this equality gap doesn't widen further. Because actually equality is a highly dependent also element on climate change and vice versa. And I can get into the Q&A about this as well. When we talk about responsibility of technology, this is a place where you can pick yourself. What is a role is something that you must do, and there's no choice out of it because you're either going to lose consumers, employees, or your revenues, or you're going to be focused on having to chase new regulations that you have not prepared for. But when it comes to responsibility, this is the space where you can decide if this is good for you or not. And if you decide to go for this, at this stage, you can be a pioneer in your own particular industry. This is an engagement, and it's a bit provocative one because not everyone agrees with many of the strategies of these companies in terms of sustainability, but it was quite of a curious decision where essentially these big, basically large giants of technology decided to start pro-climate action lobbying. And that is not to show you that you need to start working with any of these companies or they're doing the best job. I'm not one to say this or to encourage this, but it is to show you that there is a certain level of responsibilities that a large company claims just because they know that there's no way out of climate change. There's just adaptation. The second responsibility that we have, but we don't necessarily claim all the time, is the fact of money. There's never been that much money in the ecosystem, and there's so much money in particular in the tech industry where now there's all these like huge Series A, Series B rounds, all focused not only in Europe, but also in the US. And with this comes responsibility, because it's up to you to decide how you spend the money, of course, with the alignment to the board members, most likely. But it's also related to the fact that you, with your engagement and the way you decide to spend them, could also be having impact on the sustainability agenda of our planet. Another responsibility that is going to become a role in the coming few years is related to transparency. When we're talking about transparency here, we're looking into actually the greenhouse gas emissions caused by humans. And that is a statistic that is general about our planet, but it's one that shows you at least where things come from. For every single product on this planet, and this is actually our job in Plan A, there's a calculation of the environmental costs related to your business. And what this means is that there's a certain level of data and analysis of this data that can allow you to start engaging these third parties, these customers, employees, into your sustainability journey. But the only way for them to be engaged is if you allow for this to really be part of their journey as well, where they become an essential step in your transformation as a sustainable business. An important element, and again, one of responsibility, is to really look at externalities. Everyone that is building a hardware, a software business, actually has a lot of side effects to the business that you do. You open a shop that delivers for 10-minute products, and you open essentially this online, of course, you're hurting the business of supermarkets. And if you look at the examples of the products that we have here, we're looking into the externalities of a product that is very familiar to us. And that is the paper bag, the plastic bag, and also these reusable tote bags that we all use quite often. What this data should be able to show you is that it's not about the type of bag you choose to use today, it's about how many times you use it, and also looking into the different building blocks and elements related to this particular bag. A plastic bag is least harmful, or so it is, even though we don't have necessarily always the waste management kind of capabilities related to that. But if you look at the CO2 emissions related to it, assuming that you're only going to use it once, and the energy related to the use of it, it clearly is a lot worse off than a bag that you can use many times. But if you look at the water consumption related to this plastic bag, then we're talking about only 580 gallons of water. But if you look at a paper bag, all these bags that we constantly get everything in these days, then we're talking about close to 10,000 gallons of water. And for the reusable bags, then we're talking about actually a requirement for us to use each and every single bag many, many times until it actually becomes least harmful than any of the other options. So in that sense, when you're building your business, you really need to think of how is my business hurting the planet? And who is on the receiving side of this negative impact? How can I engage them so that I make their life easier by asking them of why my product is not necessarily good for them? Last to final element of responsibility is related to education. We work in an industry that there's millions, hundreds of millions of people that are employed. So for you as a manager, as a CEO, as someone that is leading the way as an investor, you have a lot of responsibility to engage these people into thinking about all these externalities of the optimization of processes and give them the chance to be the stakeholder that influences a more positive agenda on the sustainability front. So where does this leave you? And where does this leave me as well, and anyone that is listening? We need to start focusing on taking action. And that is not to say that you all need to start working on a business like mine, but actually you can take your chance by working on the business you have today. First of all, it's about taking a stance as a company where you work already. If the company has not kicked off its sustainability journey, be the one that kicks it off. It doesn't need to kick off with the use of a software like ours, but maybe it's about setting up a recycling scheme in your office or engaging your company on going on a cleanup in your city. And if your city is Berlin, be sure that there's a lot of work to be done. Inform yourself about greenwashing. As sustainability becomes a lot more important and prominent, also the greenwashing becomes a lot more prominent. All of these carbon neutrality claims, all of these one-off calculations with no scientific backing are actually hurtful for our planet. The EU gave us statistics that more than 50% of the claims that have been made by companies are not scientifically backed, which means that the digging needs to happen, and it's going to happen, but only in the coming years, in terms of making sure that these claims are being taken into account and then transformed into action that is actually good for the planet. Work on innovation addressing climate change. You don't need to start a company, but you can support existing companies, or you can at least mentor someone. There's incredibly exciting initiatives that just kick off maybe accelerators or certain different formats that allow you to be engaged and use your skill sets. And finally, remember that reduction is the only way forward. We have science that shows us that no carbon neutrality claim, nothing that is simply there to do offsetting, is really going to allow for our planet to become healthy again. And it is our responsibility as a community of business people, as a community of tech people, to really allow for this transformation to happen, because we have the resources and also the influence by the products that we have and the teams that we are developing. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Lubomila. Very interesting. And I can say one of the first steps you can take to inform yourself about greenwashing is to watch our session tomorrow at midday about it. So how do the challenges, Lubomila, differ when decarbonising between small, agile companies and multinational corporations?
So one of the biggest challenges that up to date, even with the big and small companies we face, is that there's a lack of depth of understanding of the challenge ahead of us, which means that the level of education is not necessarily as deep. With the corporates, we see a lot more of an increase kind of knowledge. You don't need to explain what scope 1, 2, and 3. With the SMEs, there's this mentality where my impact is only just a tiny kind of drop in the ocean. How can I actively participate? I really don't have anything to do. And the solution for this is actually, first of all, to increase the level of understanding of what sustainability is. And second of all, to understand that the climate change challenge is one of lack of collaboration. Because even if you look at how emissions are calculated, there's so many interdependencies between a company and all of its suppliers, between a company and all of its customers. you take an automotive, 98% of its emissions are sitting in scope 3, which is its suppliers, it's in consumers and how they use the products and so on. So actually all of us have a lot of impact and the challenges are very similar. We need to all increase really this maturity of understanding of the problem that we're solving.
Mm-hmm. And how important is the rhetoric around fighting climate change? And how can we avoid cliches and buzzwords being so overused that they lose their meaning?
It's an incredibly important question. What has happened over the last 1.5 years is that there's so many now different approaches and commitments and so on. And we're working really closely actually with the policymakers to enable streamlined framing of the labeling, also of the punishment related to greenwashing and so on, because that is kind of one of the main challenges we have. I think the rhetoric is still quite, I would say, superficial in terms of how we talk about sustainability and climate change. There's this dramatic statements related to we're going extinct, and at least we as a company do not drive the agenda by imposing fear on people. It's more about like, you're part of this, you need to take action, and this is the positive way of you to engage. The second challenge is related to the fact that science is continuously being disregarded. There's a lot of solutions popping up on the stage that unfortunately do not look into all these frameworks that allow for accurate calculation, accurate decarbonization strategy definition. And that's where we already have a prescription, a set of tooling that we can tap into. And I think the final element is related to the fact that we need to understand that sustainability is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight for someone to become sustainable, be it as an individual or as a company, and it's something that involves a lot of stakeholders. So we need to have respect for this process and really not jump on positive claims like we're carbon neutral overnight and we've achieved net zero, which corporates don't yet claim, but definitely smaller companies are trying to.
Mm-hmm. And you just mentioned the importance of listening to climate scientists and, the science field in general. We previously just heard from 2 climate scientists. How can we close that link between businesses and scientists? And one of the viewers asked, how should we educate people about sustainability?
Since the beginning of Plan A, I have always had next to me and the team a lot of scientists. And in the beginning it was a few, now it's a lot. And the thing that I've learned by working with them is, first of all, that you need to be educated when you speak to them. Like you can't just assume, but they also need to know how to speak the language of a common human like me that has studied finance. I do not necessarily, or before 5 years ago, I wasn't necessarily living and breathing all of these frameworks and standards, and now I do. So how we engage is by really starting to put emphasis on the necessity of depth of knowledge. We're solving complex problems. So that means that we need to also use the complex solutions that have been offered to us. There's no magic stick, magic wand that is allowing us essentially to be successful in this climate change journey, which means that we need to tap into all these resources and decades of knowledge since the 60s that there is a problem and there's a lot of solutions for it. So I would say more respect on both sides about the complexity of the issue and more respect on both sides about who is at what level of understanding and giving more visibility. And that's more like a call to the press. So anyone that is from the press listening, scientists do not get at all visibility about the things that they're working on, and they should. I can't hear you. Unfortunately.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Another question from the audience. Which people and competencies does the tech industry need to drive sustainability?
I always explain sustainability in a company as something that is divided in 3 stages. The first stage is where you are outsourcing sustainability. You've calculated your emissions, maybe with an open source calculator, and then you basically compensate, and that's as much as you do. The second stage is where you're starting to embed sustainability into the work and the mindset of the company. And this place and this moment of capability requires at least a green champion. It doesn't need to be someone that is full-time employee on the topic, but requires at least a green champion that is willing to take the topic, manage it and start setting up a few ideas, a few tasks for the whole company to manage. In the larger companies, this really requires a lot more coordination. So there we're talking about really hiring someone for sustainability. And then if we move to the final stage, which is where eventually all of us are going to get to, is where sustainability is embedded in every single department. There's already a lot of discussions about sustainable design, sustainable product development, sustainable engineering, as well as sustainable culture, people and culture management. These are essentially these elements where I was mentioning in terms of the responsibility related to education, where you as this top UX designer can also learn about what really makes UX design unsustainable. How do you create a lot of emissions by adding 5 more buttons that maybe make it cooler and nicer, but maybe allow for further emissions to be created? And this is the stage which we are headed towards, but anyone can already learn because there's so much content out there. And I would encourage for any company to check out how they can also get their different departments engaged with this topic.
On top of reducing emissions, a lot of companies are becoming much more aware of natural climate solutions, for example, addressing loss of biodiversity. How important do you think such things like carbon offsetting and restorations projects will become in the coming years and decades?
So the first step of the maturity of us understanding climate change has been really focused on trying to put it in our minds as like a currency that we understand. And this is where the labeling carbon really helped us, because it feels like really a monetary term. It's something that you can buy and something that you can trade and so on. Now where we're headed, and actually we as a company in Plan A, we really cherish biodiversity as well as water consumption, because these are two elements without which our ecosystem cannot sustain itself. We're talking there about really focusing on circular economy. We're talking there about really natural solutions for product design, natural solutions for also kind of using resources that maybe in today's terms would be considered as waste and so on. And the importance for those is really high. And I think for anyone that is embarking on their sustainability journey and already has this nudge or kind of sensation that they should be looking into what nature can offer, they really need to spend time on that. It really matters because people can learn a lot from nature. There's already biomimicry. There's so many incredible ways in which we do sustainable product development as well as sustainable processes. These are places we can tap into and learn from. And I would highly encourage all of you today, actually, on the 60th anniversary of WWF, to look into a lot of the work that they've done. For example, them as an organization, they do not agree with the labeling climate neutral because they think that this disregards biodiversity as a whole. They have a lot of work that has been done on this topic, and they even have calculators related to that and a lot of data. This is the way we need to be thinking, and we're going to get to this maturity, I don't doubt it.
Great. Thank you so much, Lubomila. It was very insightful, and I think everyone really enjoyed your presentation today. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.